Hey guys! Tonight we drift back through time to the scorched and golden sands of ancient Persia, modern-day Iran, where the air is dry, the sun relentless, and the heat so thick you could chew it. The year could be 500 BCE. You're standing outside in the middle of a desert town, the sun pounding against your head like a slow drum, and yet, somewhere nearby, someone's cool, comfortable, maybe even chilling with a date or two under a shaded archway, sipping from a clay cup cooled in a basin of water. How is that possible? You look around. No air conditioners hum, no electric fans buzz, just wind, dust, and the far-off bleating of a goat. And still, somehow, someone figured out how to stay frosty in a furnace. You're about to find out how. Spoiler alert, you probably wouldn't survive this without their tricks. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere warm tonight, leave your city and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the dusty alleys of an ancient village near Yazd, your sandals scuffing dry clay. The buildings are thick, mud brick walls with no windows, flat rooftops, shaded courtyards. Everything looks strangely huddled in on itself, like the whole place is hiding from the sun. And in a way it is. This isn't just survival, it's a science. Your first clue comes as you press your palm to a shaded wall. It's cool, genuinely cool. Not slightly less scorching than outside, but I might nap here, cool. You step under an archway and feel a breeze brush your cheek. A breeze. In this heat, no one's around, yet you swear the air moves gently past you. Welcome to the world's first real air conditioning system without freon, filters, or fossil fuels. Historians still argue whether the Persians were the first to crack the code of passive cooling, or if the Egyptians or Mesopotamians beat them to it. But what's clear is that the ancient Persians took the idea and ran with it, digging, designing, and refining methods that still baffle architects today. Let's talk about that desert. Daytime temperatures soar past 100 degrees Celsius, but nights can be chilly. The key was learning how to trap and store the night's coolness, and how to create airflow that moved without machinery. You'll see this again and again on our journey tonight. Solutions built not from high-tech tools, but deep observation of nature. You glance up and notice something curious. Tall towers on rooftops, slit open like they're gasping for air. You'll explore those later. For now, you duck into a doorway. Inside is dim and quiet, the thick mud walls swallowing sound. A shallow pool sits in the center of the floor, catching light from a hole in the roof. The water ripples slightly, from wind. How? You're standing in a space cooled by three forces: geometry, water, and wind. The air passes over the pool, evaporates slightly, and lowers the temperature. The tall ceilings let hot air rise, and the floor stays several degrees cooler thanks to underground construction. It's not magic. It's millennia-old math. And if you're wondering how people figured all this out without thermometers or blueprints, well, you wouldn't be the first. It's part genius, part necessity. When your life depends on beating the heat, you get clever quickly. And when you don't have electrical appliances to fall back on, you observe the world like your survival depends on it, because it does. Even the layout of these desert towns is strategic. Narrow alleys maximize shade, and buildings are clustered so closely that they block the worst of the midday sun. Streets are aligned to catch prevailing winds, and courtyards are arranged to maximize airflow. It's like the entire city is playing an architectural game of hide-and-seek with the sun. And now, you lie back on a woven mat, maybe on a shaded rooftop where families sleep during summer nights. Above you, the stars shimmer like spilled sugar. Below you, The thick mud brick house slowly releases the day's trapped heat back into the sky. The breeze is steady. The night is quiet. You're not just staying cool, you're part of a system, tuned perfectly to its environment. Still think you'd make it in the ancient world without sunscreen, without sunglasses, and certainly without that overpriced portable fan you bring to festivals. You wouldn't last an hour in this heat without help. But with the help of ancient Persian ingenuity, maybe you'd survive long enough to nap. And don't worry, we're just getting started. Soon you'll explore underground rivers, wind towers, and even an ice house in the middle of a desert. For now, let your breath match the gentle rhythm of the desert wind, and let the whisper of ancient cooling lull you deeper into this strange and wonderful world. You step carefully down into the earth, your sandals sliding slightly on the smooth, cool slope. It's dark here, noticeably darker, and the air feels thick with moisture, like you've entered a hidden world tucked under the skin of the desert. Welcome to the qanat. At first glance, it might feel like you're descending into a well, but this is much more than a hole in the ground. The tunnel you're in stretches for miles. Yes, miles angled ever so gently so that water flows smoothly from a distant underground source toward a town that would otherwise be parched and sun-scorched. You can barely hear it, but there's a quiet, almost sacred trickle echoing around you. These underground aqueducts were carved by hand, by workers who understood the earth like a second language. They picked the right slope too steep, and the water rushes and erodes, too shallow, and it stagnates. The result, a perfectly balanced lifeline of water, flowing invisibly beneath your feet. As you shuffle forward, your eyes adjust to the gloom. The tunnel walls are lined with clay and stone, and every few hundred meters, shafts rise up to the surface, like chimneys. These aren't just for light or air. They were the original maintenance access points, allowing workers to climb down and check the flow. Think of it as ancient plumbing, built on a scale that would make a modern engineer blink. You crouch near the water's edge and touch the surface. It's cold, genuinely cold. Not slightly cool from the shade cold, but straight from a mountain spring cold. And that's no accident. These qanats aren't just functional. They're part of the reason ancient Persians could refrigerate, hydrate, and, most importantly, for our journey, ventilate. Historians still argue whether the first qanats originated in Iran, Afghanistan, or even Western Pakistan. But there's little debate that the Persians were the ones who scaled them up into something majestic, turning entire cities into miraculously livable oases. Here's the quiet twist: qanats didn't just move water, they moved air. The same shafts that let workers in and out also allowed airflow to rise, sink, and drift, creating pressure differentials that acted like nature's own fan system. In homes built over qanats, you'd sometimes find small floor vents. Air cooled by underground water would rise into rooms above, providing a kind of geothermal air conditioning system centuries before the thermostat existed. You move along the tunnel now, brushing past carved niches where oil lamps once flickered. Imagine a crew of men down here in total silence, chipping through rock, calculating curves with little more than instinct, prayer, and maybe a donkey at the surface hauling up buckets of dust. It's hard work, dangerous too. Many qanat workers called muqannis spent their entire lives underground, guiding water like shepherds in the dark. And what a system they created! Some qanats stretched over 50 kilometers. That's longer than a marathon. Entire cities like ancient Gonabad or modern Yazd were built in alignment with their channels. Rich families paid for longer and deeper qanats, while smaller neighborhoods shared modest ones. The depth and length of your water source quietly said a lot about your status. You climb back toward the light now, blinking as you rise from centuries-old stone into the dry brightness above. But even up here, the work of the qanat is felt. You step into a shaded courtyard and feel the breath of the tunnel, exhaling cool air, through a clever vent beneath a stone bench. You sit, you breathe, and the heat feels just a little less cruel. You might wonder why all this effort when wells were easier, because in much of Persia, groundwater was too deep to reach directly. Or worse, it was salty. Qanats tapped higher elevation aquifers and carried sweet, cold water gently downhill. No need for pumps, no risk of evaporation. Just pure, clean flow. And they lasted. Some qanats still run today over 2,000 years later quietly, steadily delivering water like they always have. No batteries required. That's more than we can say for most modern infrastructure. There's something peaceful about knowing that beneath a sunburned city, there's a whole hidden system working silently, invisibly, just to keep things livable. Like a subterranean heartbeat, older than empire, deeper than time. You lie back again, this time in the courtyard shade, and close your eyes. Somewhere below, water slips past like silk over stone. The breeze smells faintly of clay and dampness. For now, in this moment, you are cooled by the quiet wisdom of the earth. You raise your head and look toward the rooftops. Tall, slender towers pierce the skyline like sails turned upright. They catch your eye not just because of their unusual shape, but because they seem to move with the sky. These are Badger's windcatchers, and they are ancient Persia's most elegant rebellion against the heat. You walk toward one slowly, craning your neck. From the ground, it looks like a chimney, but you quickly realize it's the exact opposite. This tower doesn't send smoke out. It draws wind in. As you step into the house beneath the windcatcher, the first thing you notice is the air. It's moving. Even in this stifling desert climate, there's a breeze floating through the room, cool and steady, brushing past your skin like a whispered promise. No fans, no power cords, just architecture. A windcatcher works on a beautifully simple principle. It steals the wind. The tall tower has multiple openings at the top, usually 4, one for each cardinal direction. Whichever side catches the wind first becomes the entrance, guiding it down into the house. The other openings act as exhausts, helping circulate stale air back out. Some towers have shutters that can be opened or closed depending on the wind's direction. Manual settings for a natural HVAC system. The wind flows downward through a shaft that stretches into the heart of the house. Sometimes it's directed over a pool of water or a qanat tunnel, cooling it even further through evaporation. This isn't just passive cooling, it's poetic cooling. A dance of elements: earth, air, water, and the blistering fire of the sun being tamed by design. You sit near the vent and watch the breeze ripple across the surface of the water basin. It's hypnotic. If you were a weary traveler entering this home, you'd feel like you just stumbled into paradise. The walls are thick and painted pale to reflect light, and the ceilings are high, letting the warm air drift above your head. But it's that steady current of wind, natural, relentless, and refreshing, that makes you want to stay forever. Historians still argue about the exact origin of the windcatcher. Some say Persia, others point to Egypt or even earlier civilizations. But while the debate swirls like the breeze through these towers, the oldest standing Badgers we know of are found in Yazd, a city that feels like it was built on an alliance with the wind itself. Yazd is the ultimate windcatcher city. Nearly every traditional house has at least one. Some mansions have 4 or more, creating cross-currents that sweep through rooms in rhythmic patterns. You picture a family lounging on cushions, sipping tea. Their only soundtrack, the soft gurgle of water and the hush of air funneling through the tower. There's a certain visual rhythm to these structures: too tall, rectangular, and always catching the sky. In the fading evening light, they cast long shadows across mud brick rooftops. From a distance, they almost look like organ pipes for the desert, playing a song only the wind understands. And here's a fun little quirk in some windcatchers. Clay pots filled with wet reeds were placed in the air's path. As wind passed through, it cooled further and smelled better too. Ancient Persian air fresheners. essentially. You've got to respect the attention to detail, function, and fragrance. You head to the roof now. The source of this whole airy symphony, up close. The windcatcher looks even more complex. Inside the shaft, the walls are ridged to help guide airflow, and at the base, narrow slits can be opened or closed to adjust temperature and pressure. It's like being inside a giant musical instrument, one that sings in gusts and sighs. But these towers weren't only for the elite. Even modest homes had simpler versions, sometimes just a single opening angled to face the prevailing wind. In public bathhouses, they were especially important, helping draw steam away and pull fresh air in. Imagine getting out of a hot bath and stepping into a naturally cooled chamber, all without a single wire or motor. Still, it wasn't perfect. On days when the air was completely still, the towers didn't do much, and if the wind was hot and dusty, well, you just close the vents and nap it out. Not every breeze is a blessing. But most of the time, they worked. They still work. And modern architects are just now catching up, using windcatcher principles in eco-friendly buildings across the Middle East, California, and even in parts of London. Once again, ancient wisdom gently tapping modern technology on the shoulder and whispering, "Try this instead." You lie back again, this time in the upper chamber where the air is clearest. Through the open mouth of the tower above, you can see a square of twilight sky. The breeze shifts slightly, carrying the faint scent of baked earth and something green, perhaps a nearby fig tree. You close your eyes and imagine the wind traveling miles just to find you, funneled, guided, and cooled by mud, brick, and human brilliance. You open your eyes and look around the room. Nothing in here looks modern. No gadgets, no wiring, no buttons to push, but it's comfortable, peaceful, even. And the secret to that comfort? Mud. Yes, mud. More specifically, a precise blend of mud, straw, and clay baked by the sun into bricks that form the bones of nearly every structure in this town. It sounds unimpressive, but this humble building material has kept people cool in the desert for over 2,500 years. And here, lying on a mat under a domed ceiling of baked earth, you start to understand why. The walls around you are at least 2 feet thick. That's not by accident. These mud brick barriers act like thermal sponges, soaking up the blistering heat of the day and slowly releasing it after sunset. During the hottest part of the afternoon, the inside of the home stays significantly cooler than the outside. At night, when the desert cools rapidly, the walls radiate warmth, balancing the temperature naturally. No fanfare, no flickering thermostats, just geometry, timing, and patience. You drag your hand across the wall. It's cool, slightly grainy. You can feel the texture of the straw mixed into the mud. It's not smooth like modern drywall, but somehow it feels more alive, like the building is breathing with you, in and out, warm and cool. The ceiling above you isn't flat either. It curves upward in a soft dome, another subtle design choice. Domes aren't just beautiful, they're functional. The shape naturally allows hot air to rise and settle at the top, leaving the lower space cooler and more comfortable for people. You start to notice how each architectural element, domes, arches, thick walls, has multiple roles: insulation, airflow, structural strength, and yes, beauty. Historians still debate exactly when and where mud brick construction first became the go-to technique for desert climates. Was it perfected in Persia, or did it originate independently in places like Mesopotamia or the Indus Valley? What's certain is that Persian architects refined it into an art form, tailoring every brick, archway, and alleyway to fight the sun with quiet elegance. Outside, the layout of the homes follows a rhythm: narrow alleys, tightly clustered buildings, and inward-facing courtyards help control both sunlight and airflow. You step into one of those courtyards, now shaded, private, and just a little cooler than the air outside. A grapevine sprawls across a wooden trellis above you, offering speckled shade and maybe a few snacks if you're lucky. Here's a strange detail you might not expect. Many of these homes are built partially underground. The living quarters are sunken slightly below ground level, using the Earth's natural insulation to protect against extreme heat. It's a trick as old as time and surprisingly effective. You move toward the kitchen, if you can call it that. It's a corner of the house with a clay stove, a few copper pots, and a deep shelf carved directly into the wall. Even the food is chosen with heat in mind. No heavy roasts here. Meals are light. Cooling yogurt with mint, cucumbers, maybe some rice with a splash of sour pomegranate juice. Spices that help you sweat. Foods that don't weigh you down. And then there's the floor. It's not tile or hardwood, it's packed earth, sometimes covered with woven mats or flat stones materials that stay cool longer and don't hold heat like modern synthetic surfaces. You stretch out across it and let the chill seep into your spine. It's like lying on a memory of a cooler time. But let's not pretend this was all about luxury. Ancient Persians weren't lounging around all day sipping rose water. These cooling systems were born out of survival. Without them, you'd be baking in a clay oven by noon. The brilliance is that the same techniques used in royal palaces were scaled down for ordinary homes. Kings had marble, but the mud brick still did the job for everyone else. And let's not forget the rooftops. When the interior of the home got too warm in summer, families simply moved upstairs. Rooftops became bedrooms, living rooms, even social spaces under the stars. You can almost hear the gentle clinking of teacups and low murmurs of a family discussing the day as they drift off to sleep beneath a slow-turning sky. Sometimes, even at night, the rooftops needed help. That's when people turned to large clay jars filled with cool water, placed strategically to absorb and radiate coolness. Some even splashed water across the floor to boost evaporation. Ancient AC, upgraded with puddles. You rest your head against a cushion and feel the day's warmth beginning to fade. The wall behind you is still cool from the morning. Outside, a breeze starts to pick up. You can hear it whispering past the windcatcher tower again. Every part of this house is working passively, silently, constantly to keep you comfortable. And all of it, from the domed ceilings to the packed earth floors, was made from mud. The same stuff you might step over on a rainy day. Here, though, it's genius. Quiet, dusty genius. The sun hangs low now, casting amber light across the rooftops as you step into the shadow of something both ancient and astonishing. Towering above you is a structure that looks almost too delicate for the harsh desert. A tall, elegant spire of mud brick and latticework rising above the skyline. This is the windcatcher of Zark, and it's not just old, it's the oldest known windcatcher in the world, still standing, still working. You crane your neck upward. This tower has watched more than 1,000 summers pass, has felt 1,000 dusty winds twist through its ribs, and it hasn't stopped breathing. Built in the city of Zark in central Iran, this badgir stands over 33 meters tall. That's higher than a 10-story building, and it was built with nothing but ancient tools, local materials, and a deep understanding of wind behavior. You step inside the building, it crowns a former water reservoir known as an ab anbar. These reservoirs weren't just for storing water, they were designed to cool it. Deep underground chambers lined with thick insulation, often combined with wind catchers like this one, kept water at near refrigeration temperatures even during the hottest months. Inside the Abi Anbar, your footsteps echo softly. The floor is cool beneath your sandals, and the air smells faintly of damp earth. The temperature difference is startling outside. It's hot enough to cook an egg on stone. In here, you almost want to wrap a shawl around your shoulders. This windcatcher doesn't just redirect breezes, it creates its own microclimate. As air flows down the tower and into the reservoir, It cools the water through a gentle process of evaporation and circulation. The design is so efficient that some Abe Anbars could keep water fresh and drinkable for months. Now imagine this wasn't a one-off experiment. This was standard technology in cities like Yazd, Zarq, Kerman, and others. Some neighborhoods had entire cooling networks built around shared reservoirs and towers. The architecture didn't just serve the individual, it supported the community. Historians still debate whether the Zarq windcatcher was originally part of a palace complex or always intended as a civic utility. But either way, it stands as proof that ancient Persia didn't just tolerate the desert, it engineered around it. You climb a narrow staircase, spiraling slowly upward through the tower's interior. The bricks are uneven, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. It's quiet in here, just the faint whistle of air moving through long-forgotten ducts. Near the top, you emerge into the open mouth of the windcatcher. From this vantage point, you can see the city of Zarq, sprawled below mud brick homes, domed roofs, winding alleys that seem to breathe with you. You stretch your hand out and feel the wind rush past your fingers. Not strong, but steady, persuasive, as if it were being invited down, not forced. Here's a detail you might not expect. These towers often included internal vanes or dividers to direct air more efficiently. Some even had dampened cloth or porous screens to increase moisture content and remove dust. Basically, they had filters. Modern HVAC systems think they're so clever. And for all their elegance, windcatchers like this were surprisingly low maintenance. A little patching here, a new mud brick there, maybe a cleaned-out vent once in a while. No monthly service fees, no replacement parts, just wind, gravity, and the slow genius of accumulated tradition. You lean back against the inside wall of the tower and take it all in the faint scent of old stone, the way light filters down in soft golden slats, the hum of the earth itself whispering through this ancient invention. Somewhere far below, someone might be collecting water from the reservoir, cooled by the same wind you're touching now. It's funny, we tend to think of ancient civilizations as hot, dry, dusty, and they were, but they were also comfortable in ways we don't often give them credit for. Not just surviving the environment, but reshaping it. You descend again, passing windows that peer out across the rooftops. The sun is beginning to dip, casting the windcatcher in dramatic silhouette. Its shadow stretches across the town like a quiet blessing. And somehow, the building itself feels alive not in a metaphorical way, but in the sense that it still performs, still functions, still responds to the world around it. You think back to your apartment at home, sealed shut with air conditioning, running 24/7 windows barely cracked for fear of breaking the perfect climate bubble. Here, in this 1,000-year-old tower, there is no bubble, the air flows freely, and the structure, instead of fighting nature, partners with it. As night falls over Zarq, the windcatcher seems to breathe even deeper, pulling the cool desert air down into the town. The Ab Anbar hums quietly beneath the surface, and the thick-walled homes begin their nightly task of absorbing the desert's chill. All around you, the city is getting ready for sleep, not just the people, but the buildings themselves. You lie back one more time, letting the last of the evening light wash over your face. You close your eyes, and the wind keeps watch. The desert moon has climbed high, casting a soft, silvery glow across the rooftops. You're walking now, slowly, following the curve of a dusty road that leads out of town, past groves of saltbush and thorny fig. It's still warm out, but the air has changed drier, crisper. And just ahead, barely visible under the moonlight, is something that looks cold. A mound of earth, rounded, steep-sided, and oddly smooth. At first glance, it resembles a giant termite hill, or maybe some sort of fortress bunker. But as you get closer, you realize what you're looking at is perhaps the most absurdly brilliant piece of ancient engineering in this entire story. You're standing in front of a yakhchal, literally, an ice pit? That's right, in the middle of a desert, ancient Persians made and stored ice. You walk around the base of the structure, tracing your fingers across the hard-packed mud and clay surface. It's not just any dome, it's massive, often over 60 feet tall. The outer shell is made from a special mixture called sarouj, a waterproof blend of clay, lime, ash, sand, goat hair, and egg whites. That's right, egg whites, the stuff of meringue and muffins. Now, part of a thermal miracle. You find a small opening and duck inside. Instantly, the air changes. It's cool, shockingly so. You can almost see your breath. The interior space opens into a deep pit, sometimes 10 or even 15 meters below ground, where chunks of ice once sat, protected from the brutal summer heat above. But wait, you might be thinking, how did they even get ice out here? Excellent question. It turns out, ancient Persians didn't just store ice, they made it. In the dead of winter, they would flood shallow pools at night, usually in long, narrow basins called yakhchal channels, often located just next to the main dome. Temperatures dropped enough overnight that water would freeze into thin sheets. Workers then gathered these sheets at dawn, broke them up, and hauled them into the insulated chamber, where they would remain solid and usable well into the scorching months of summer. Sometimes they'd pack the ice with straw or sawdust for extra insulation. Other times, they'd layer it with fruit quince, dates, maybe even pomegranates, creating rudimentary freezers for both food and cooling. Historians still argue how widespread the practice was, whether only wealthy households had access to stored ice or whether larger yakhchals served whole neighborhoods. But archaeological evidence suggests these weren't rare luxuries. In major cities like Yazd, Kerman, and Kashan, they were fairly common civic structures. Giant fridges, ancient style. You sit on the ledge overlooking the pit, imagining workers hauling ice blocks up and down narrow ramps. It's dark and quiet, but not in a lifeless way, more like the hush of something patiently enduring. The air smells faintly of straw and damp clay. Even in this darkness, the geometry of the space is soothing curved walls, deep shadows, a subtle hum of temperature balance that's been in place for centuries. Here's something you might not expect. Some scholars believe that yakhchals were occasionally used for more than just storing ice. There's speculation they may have been used for making early forms of sorbet, yes, ancient Persian ice cream, flavored with rose water, saffron, or fruit juice. Can you imagine tasting that, a spoonful of frozen sweetness in the middle of a desert town, while camels wander past and the air smells of date palms? You lean back against the inner wall. It's cool and slightly damp to the touch. The outside heat feels 1,000 miles away. You realize that this dome isn't just shelter, it's defiance. It's a statement, you can burn, but we will not boil. All around the ancient world, you'll find examples of civilizations working around their climates, but very few managed to reverse it the way the Persians did, creating genuine cold in a place where even shade can feel aggressive. And the elegance of it all? No motors, no refrigerants, no carbon footprint, just physics, geometry, patience, and a ridiculous amount of cleverness. You exit the yakhchal and stand in the moonlight again, looking back at the dome. It doesn't glitter or glow. It just sits there plain, sturdy, purposeful. You begin to notice that it resembles a glacier that's grown up out of the earth, a cold memory in the middle of a hot land. As you walk back toward the village, the wind starts to pick up again, funneled through the streets by walls and towers, swirling gently around your ankles. Somewhere nearby, someone's probably reaching for a small bowl chilled from the yakhchal, spooning out a half-frozen dessert older than your country. You smile in the dark, amazed that ice could survive here and that someone once looked at the desert, and thought, "You know what we need? A popsicle." You wake to the soft clatter of sandals on stone and the low hum of morning. It's early, just past dawn, and the desert is holding its breath before the heat returns. You walk slowly through the waking streets, following a narrow channel of gently flowing water. It glides past doorways and through courtyards, turning corners like it belongs there. And it does. This is the work of the qanats. Again, those silent underground rivers, but this time, you see what they do above ground. You kneel beside the water, cupping it in your hands. It's cool. Always cool. It doesn't rush. It doesn't gurgle. It just moves with calm purpose, like it has nothing to prove. This small stream might look humble, but it's carrying the weight of the entire city. In ancient Persia, water wasn't just for drinking, it was a system. It ran beneath homes, through gardens, across mosques and bathhouses. It irrigated pomegranate orchards and date groves, but also powered cooling systems, like the ones you've already seen in the windcatchers and yakchals. The qanats were the invisible veins that kept this ancient body alive. You follow the stream until it leads you to a public square, a quiet, shady space with a few traders setting up their stalls. At the center is a small fountain, fed directly by the qanat system. Children splash at the edge while a baker sets his baskets down beside the bread oven. The sound of the water blends with the early morning calls of birds, and for a moment, it feels like you've slipped into the lungs of a living city, breathing, flowing, cooling itself. What's extraordinary is just how well this system scaled. The Achaemenid Empire, at its height, stretched from Greece to India. Entire cities, including the grand capitals of Pasargadae and Persepolis, were built with qanats as a foundational infrastructure. Not an afterthought, the thought. You pass a caravanserai, a sort of ancient Persian hotel, where merchants and their camels once rested after long desert journeys. These places often had their own dedicated qanats, and you can still see the remains of one, a stone channel leading into a shaded pool flanked by crumbling columns. Imagine arriving here after weeks on a dusty road, peeling off layers of sand-caked clothing and dipping your face into that blessed cold water. Heavenly. Historians still argue how standardized the qanat networks really were. Some believe there was a central authority managing water rights and maintenance. Others think it was more informal, organized locally by village elders. What's certain is that the system worked. Some regions had dozens of qanats crisscrossing underground, forming an invisible architecture that shaped everything above it. And this wasn't just about practical survival. There was something almost spiritual in the way Persians viewed water. In Zoroastrianism, one of the region's oldest religions, water was sacred, a pure element to be protected and revered. It's no wonder that water management became not just a skill, but a legacy. Qanat diggers were respected. Generations of families passed down the knowledge, like keepers of an underground oracle. You step inside a home now modest, but perfectly designed. A small vent in the floor lets in a breath of cool air from the qanat below. This wasn't just a lucky accident. Homes were built around the water. Rooms for sleeping were placed directly above vents. The kitchen was located where the flow was strongest, allowing the water to help preserve food. Even the layout of courtyards and windows was planned to complement the direction of water and wind. You sit by a low table, sipping cool sour cherry juice. The glass is sweating in your hand, not from ice, but from air cooled by qanat-borne breezes drifting gently through the house. It's the kind of comfort that doesn't announce itself. It just works. And here's a curious tidbit. Qanats weren't just used for cooling and irrigation. In some cases, they powered mills. Small water wheels placed inside the shafts harness the flow to grind grain, run machinery, or even produce paper. So, yes, that flatbread you're eating, it may have been born of a breeze and baked by the sun, with a little help from a subterranean stream. You walk through a garden next, lush and shaded by tall cypress trees. This is a shahar bag, a Persian-style garden divided into 4 parts by water channels. The layout represents paradise, both in the poetic and religious sense. Water doesn't just feed the plants here, it defines the space. It's the blueprint of tranquility. And that's the thing about these ancient systems. They didn't just solve problems, they shaped culture, architecture, food, religion, even poetry. All of it flowed from the quiet miracle beneath your feet. A technology that never boasted, never blinked, and never needed rebooting. As you leave the garden, you pause one last time beside the qanat channel. The water is still moving. It will keep moving. Maybe not forever, but for 1,000 years. It has, and right now, in this moment, it's enough to know that the desert can be tamed not with force, but with flow. You turn down a shaded alley, the water's whisper fading behind you. Onward now, to palaces where even kings needed to beat the heat. You step into a palace courtyard, and for a moment, you forget you're in the middle of a desert. Cool air brushes your cheeks. The faint scent of roses drifts past your nose, and the splashing sound of water lapping in a shallow pool echoes beneath tall stone columns. Welcome to the world of the Achaemenid elite, where even King Darius himself couldn't stand the heat and made sure he never had to. The palace complex around you is vast, symmetrical, and immaculately constructed. Stone pathways divide lush gardens into perfect quadrants. Vines curl around trellises. Cypress trees line the walkways like guards at attention. And in every direction, the architecture whispers the same ancient command, "Stay cool." You wander past one of the palace walls and place your palm against it. It's cool. The stone has absorbed the desert chill from the night before and is still resisting the rising sun. Inside, you pass through a sequence of increasingly shaded rooms, each one designed to shield you further from the heat. It's not just impressive, it's intentional. These palaces weren't just grand, they were engineered comfort zones. The ancient Persian kings, especially the Achaemenids, were no fools when it came to climate. Darius I, the man behind Persepolis, didn't just want towering columns and golden reliefs. He wanted airflow. He wanted insulation. He wanted a place where the sun was something to admire from the shade. Persepolis, one of the great wonders of the ancient world, sits on a terrace high above the plains. It's not just scenic, it's strategic. Elevation means cooler nights and stronger breezes. And those breezes were harnessed masterfully. Every corridor, every room, every royal hall had built-in ventilation, often guided by natural gradients and channeling from underground spaces. You enter one such hall now. Light filters through narrow stone slits high in the walls. These aren't windows, they're thermal regulators. Thin enough to keep the heat out, wide enough to allow light and minimal air. Think of them as the Achaemenid version of UV filtering glass. Even the materials were chosen for temperature control. Stone and thick mud brick were used not only for strength, but for their ability to moderate heat swings. The ceilings were high, allowing hot air to rise and settle far above the level of your royal sandals. In some rooms, shallow pools were built into the floor, catching any stray breeze and cooling it further. Historians still debate how much of this was intentional design and how much was happy coincidence. Did the architects fully understand thermodynamics? Or did they just know what worked and build around it? But whatever the case, the result is undeniable. You're standing in a place that could host hundreds of people in peak summer and still feel comfortable. As you explore deeper, you enter a royal bath complex. The floor is polished stone, and water channels run through it like veins. Some of the pools are fed directly by qanats, cold and constant. Others were used to bathe, refresh, or even chill amphoras of wine. It's said that Persian kings had an entire staff dedicated to maintaining these indoor climates, fanning, cooling, and keeping things just right. And here's a fun little fact. The Achaemenids weren't just masters of architecture. They were early climate diplomats. When Alexander the Great conquered Persia and marched through these palaces, he was stunned by the cooling systems. Ancient Greek writers described Persian homes as blessed with air from beneath and above. Imagine a man used to open Greek courtyards stepping into a shadowed palace cooled from the floor upward. That's culture shock. 330 BCE style. Even the gardens played a role. The famous Chahar Bagh layout you saw earlier. It wasn't just about aesthetics, it acted as a heat trapper and diffuser. Trees provided shade. Water channels cooled the air, and reflective surfaces bounced light away from walkways and entrances. You walk among those gardens now, hearing the crunch of gravel underfoot and the soft slosh of moving water. You pass under a wooden awning strung with climbing vines, a servant well. In this moment, it's just a dusty memory passes you a cold drink. Rose water, saffron, maybe a touch of sour grape juice. Not just a treat, but a way to keep the body balanced in the heat. Here's the kicker. All this happened without a single switch, plug, or electric hum, and it worked. The Palace of Persepolis wasn't just a symbol of imperial power. It was a finely tuned climate machine disguised as a monument. And even today, in the ruins of Persepolis, visitors often report feeling cooler inside the shadowed halls than outside, even with centuries of decay. The passive cooling still lingers, like a memory etched in mud brick. You sit now on a low stone bench beneath an arch. The sun is climbing, but you barely feel it. A breeze slides past your neck and disappears into a slit in the wall. Somewhere above you, a vent opens just enough to let hot air escape. You didn't touch a thing. The building did it for you. You realize that comfort, in the ancient Persian sense, wasn't about dominating the environment. It was about designing with it. The kings didn't conquer the desert. They negotiated. And as you rise to leave the palace, stepping through columned halls into sunlit courtyards, you notice something subtle no matter where you go. The air always feels like it's moving. Not rushing, not blowing, just moving. Like it knows where you're going, and it's already there, waiting to cool you down. You step outside the palace walls and onto a narrow footpath shaded by olive trees. The breeze from earlier is still with you, lightly threading its way through your hair, brushing your sleeves, never quite still. And now, we shift from what was built above ground to what was understood within it, because the brilliance of ancient Persian cooling wasn't just structure, it was science. You pause beside a quiet courtyard and sit on a low stool near a shallow water basin. It's the kind you've seen before, built into the floor, designed to cool passing air. But this time, you watch more carefully. The breeze enters the space from a high vent, skims the water's surface, and flows over to the opposite wall where it rises and slips through a small opening near the ceiling. And as it moves, you notice the temperature drop just slightly, but enough to feel. You're not imagining it. This is evaporative cooling in effect, where air passing over water becomes cooler as some of the water evaporates. It's the same principle that cools your skin when you sweat. Except here, it's built into the house. And the Persians didn't stumble upon it by accident. They used it deliberately, repeatedly, and brilliantly. You get up and walk into a domed chamber simple in design, with a central skylight and a qanat vent near the floor. Here, you feel something even more distinct. The cool air doesn't just pass by, it swirls. The curved walls and ceiling aren't just architectural flair, they guide airflow in circular patterns, promoting movement even in still weather. You're inside a passive convection loop, designed centuries before the concept had a name. Cool air from the qanat is pulled in low, warms slightly as it rises, and exits near the top, creating a gentle cycle. No fans, no switches, just physics, doing what it does best. Historians still argue whether Persian architects understood these systems scientifically, or if their genius was born of long observation. Were they early scientists, or just really attentive masons? Either way, the result is the same functional, quiet cooling based on natural laws. Even the placement of buildings was strategic. Homes were built facing the prevailing winds. Courtyards were sunk slightly into the ground to trap cooler air. Trees were planted to create pressure gradients. Yes, that's right, trees. A tall tree on the hot side of a wall could create enough shade to shift airflow direction. And if you're thinking that sounds like advanced climate design, you're not wrong. You walk now through a bathhouse, an ancient hammam. It's steamy, tiled, and echoing with quiet drips. Hammams often use the same science, but in reverse, hot air would rise and be vented out, while cooler air was drawn in below. And even in places meant to be warm, the goal was balanced to sweat without suffocating. In one corner, you see a small alcove filled with wet reeds, another example of Persian air filtering. Air passed through these porous, damp plants, picking up moisture and leaving behind dust. It's like stepping through a primitive humidifier designed not for gadgets, but for breathing. And the rooftops. Let's not forget those. You've climbed them before, but now you think about what they really are: radiative surfaces. At night, they release stored heat back into the sky. In the cold desert hours, people sometimes splashed water across the flat roofs, letting it freeze into ice by morning. That's not just weather that's radiative cooling. The roof becomes a heat sink, shedding warmth directly into the upper atmosphere. No panels, no insulation foam, just sky. You sit now on such a rooftop, a woven rug beneath you, the stars beginning to appear overhead. The air up here feels different, open, light, mobile. Below you, every home is breathing, pulling in coolness, releasing heat, adjusting itself like an old, wise machine. And the elegance of it all, it's scalable. A hut and a palace both use the same principles. Wind and water don't care about your wealth. A reed screen works the same whether you're a shepherd or a shah. You recall the yakchals, those icy domes in the desert, and realize they're just the extreme end of the same science. Temperature differentials, evaporative cooling, insulation through earth and straw, it's all variations on a theme. A symphony composed by observation, refined by experience, and performed every day under the open Persian sun. And here's something curious. Modern engineers now use this very data Persian techniques of airflow and insulation to design energy-efficient buildings. Terms like thermal mass, natural ventilation, and passive solar cooling dominate green architecture. But all of it, the Persians were doing it with dirt, water, and geometry 2,500 years ago. So you sit in the dark, smiling at the breeze, realizing you've been living inside a physics experiment all night. But it doesn't feel like science. It feels like comfort, like rest, like wisdom that doesn't need to explain itself. The air moves past you one last time. Soft, slow, sure. You stir slightly as the breeze shifts. It's still cool, still comforting. But this time it carries a different energy, like an echo from another place. You sit up slowly and realize that, while much of what you've seen has been marvelously Persian, the techniques themselves, well, they traveled. Tonight's question: who really invented air conditioning? You'd think the answer would be simple after all. Windcatchers and qanats seem distinctly Persian, but dig into the history a little deeper, and the story gets more complicated. Historians still argue over where the idea of cooling with architecture truly began. Was it in ancient Iran, Egypt, Mesopotamia, maybe even the Indus Valley? What we do know is that many of these civilizations lived in brutally hot climates, and each found ways to adapt. The ancient Egyptians, for example, hung wet reeds in windows and let the desert breeze pass through them, basic evaporative cooling. Long before the Persians built their yakchals, The Mesopotamians constructed thick-walled ziggurats with central courtyards that used shade and airflow to lower temperatures. And the people of the Indus Valley, as far back as 2500 BCE, built homes with inner courtyards and high ceilings to catch crosswinds. So, who did it first? That's the part no one agrees on. In fact, some scholars insist the whole idea of first is misleading, that each culture arrived at similar solutions independently, driven by the same basic problem: how to stay cool when the sun wants to cook you alive. Still, there's a case to be made for the Persians. They took bits and pieces from older traditions and turned them into something systematic. They weren't just experimenting, they were integrating. Windcatchers weren't random flukes, they were standard in houses. Qanats weren't elite luxuries, they were lifelines for cities and farms alike. Yakchals weren't mystical ice caves, they were tools of civic planning. You imagine an ancient engineer perhaps working in Persepolis, sketching airflow diagrams into wet clay. Or maybe not diagrams, but decisions. Where to dig, how high to build, which direction to face. Trial, error, and sweat. And little by little, a desert kingdom became an early laboratory for environmental control. The influence didn't stop at Persia's borders. You travel now by imagination, if not by foot, across the ancient world. To the oases of North Africa, where windcatcher-style towers begin to appear in Tunisia and Morocco. To the mud cities of Yemen, with their high-rise homes and clever ventilation shafts. To Andalusia in Islamic Spain, where courtyard gardens and tiled fountains weren't just for show, they were cooling machines. Even in India, Mughal architects, centuries after the Achaemenids, built palaces with underground channels and water-cooled breezeways. It wasn't Persian, not exactly. But the DNA is there, a lineage of architecture that learns from the past, borrows what works, and keeps it going. Here's a curious fringe theory. Some scholars suggest that Chinese cooling systems, like their underground ice cellars and wind towers in Gansu, may have drawn inspiration from westward trade along the Silk Road. The Persians exported more than spices and rugs. They exported ideas. And yet, for all this brilliance, none of these ancient systems came with blueprints. You won't find scrolls filled with formulas or textbooks tucked in some royal archive. The knowledge was passed by doing father to son, builder to apprentice, an oral tradition of architecture, sustained by dusty hands and sunburned foreheads. You lie back once more, thinking of all the buildings around the world, past and present, that owe a little something to the Persians. The offices with green roofs, the desert hotels with solar chimneys, even your own house, perhaps, with its shaded patio or high-ceiling echoes of old decisions made under older suns. You can still feel the scholarly tug-of-war. Some insist the Egyptians were first. Others point to the qanat systems as the clear origin. And then there's the camp that says we're all missing the point. It's not about who invented cooling, it's about who perfected it. And there, Persia makes a strong case. Because you're not just lying in a room tonight, you're floating in a current of inherited wisdom, a system so quiet you almost didn't notice it, so effective that it didn't need to shout. And as the breeze moves gently through the walls again, you realize whoever invented it first, the Persians, made it sing. You wake up slowly, the kind of waking where you're not sure if you actually slept or just drifted into some kind of historical trance. Around you, the mud brick walls glow faintly in the morning light. The breeze is still playing its ancient tune through the windcatcher above, but this time, we're not peeking into palaces or yakchals. This time, you're simply home. Not your home, a Persian home, modest, practical, and cool in all the ways that matter. You stretch, sit up, and take in your surroundings. The room is small, with thick walls and a single open vent near the floor where the qanat sent air sighs upward. The ceiling curves slightly arched to encourage air to rise and float away. There's no glass on the window, just wooden shutters you can tilt for light or shade. A linen curtain sways in the doorway. Everything here is exactly where it needs to be. You slip on your sandals and pad softly into the inner courtyard. This is the heart of the home, a shaded, private, open-air space that doubles as a living room, cooling chamber, and sometimes a nap zone. The fountain in the middle gurgles quietly, fed by the qanat below. A lemon tree leans lazily across one corner, offering both fruit and a few patches of dappled light. This is daily life in a house designed to stay cool without effort. You watch as a woman steps into the courtyard carrying a clay jug. She fills it from the fountain, then wraps it in damp cloth and sets it near the wall in the shade. No fridge needed. The porous clay and wet cloth will keep the water cold for hours. Evaporation. Again, your new best friend. Breakfast appears simple, but perfect for the heat. Flatbread, soft cheese, cucumbers, and a bit of mint. Maybe some dates, too. Everything is light and designed to hydrate, not heat you up. In climates like this, heavy meals are for fools or foreigners. You follow the family's routine. Chores are done early, while the air is still soft. Midday is for rest. Everyone retreats indoors. Curtains drawn. Vents opened just so. Even the chickens in the alley seem to nap. And this rhythm, it's not just cultural, it's architectural. These homes were meant to be used this way. Floors are kept bare, cool to the touch. Furniture is low, breathable. Thick rugs only come out in winter. Even the paint matters. Walls are often whitewashed to reflect heat and light rather than absorbing it. Historians still debate how these design principles spread between households. Were they enforced by local tradition, passed down by builders, or did the houses simply evolve through centuries of tweaks until they became perfect little air-cooled cocoons? No one knows for sure. But what's clear is that comfort was not a luxury, it was baked into daily life. You lie on a woven mat in the corner, just beneath a high window slit. The breeze flows past your face, carrying the scent of herbs from the courtyard. Somewhere nearby, someone is grinding spices, the soft scrape of stone against stone blending with birdsong. And then you hear a low laugh. Two neighbors talking just outside the wall. They're discussing the windcatcher on the roof. One swears his catches more breeze because of its angle. The other says it's because he uses damp cloths in the shaft. It's not just small talk, it's community-based climate engineering. You step outside to wander the neighborhood. Each home has its own variation on the same theme: shaded courtyards, windcatcher towers, qanat-cooled basements. There's a quiet pride in how well they all work. No one brags about their utility bills. No one has one. A boy passes you with a fan made of woven palm leaves. Not electric, not needed. Just a little extra help on still days. People here don't expect total control over the climate they work with it. They pace themselves. They know when to move and when to wait. You find a quiet spot on a rooftop later that day, under a makeshift awning. You lie back and think about your own home, sealed shut, insulated, refrigerated, humming with electricity, and yet somehow less aware. These Persian homes breathe. They flex. They think with you. Even something as simple as a door matters. In traditional homes, doorways are staggered, never aligned directly across from each other. Why? To manage airflow, to create pressure shifts, to slow the wind just enough that it lingers instead of blowing through too quickly. It's thoughtful design, but it also feels intimate, like the house is part of your family. Even the nights are planned for. Many homes have rooftop sleeping platforms, just a raised bed, a rolled mat, a view of the stars, and a whispering breeze. When the walls hold too much warmth, the sky becomes your ceiling. You lie there now, imagining 1,000 families doing the same, spaced across rooftops, eyes closed, limbs relaxed, listening to the same breeze you're feeling now. And for a brief moment, time bends. You're not in the 21st century anymore. You're just living. You stay still for a while, nestled in the hush of a rooftop afternoon. But your curiosity tugs you gently up. You want to know more, not from blueprints or ruins, but from the people who wrote about this world as it lived. The travelers, the poets, the diplomats. Tonight, you follow the thread of the written breeze, what outsiders had to say about the cooling wonders of Persia. Your journey takes you down winding alleys to the local madrasa, part school, part library, part oasis of thought. Inside, the walls are thick with scrolls, parchment, and worn books. The scent of dry paper and ink lingers in the air, cooled, of course, by cleverly positioned vents. A small clay pot filled with damp lavender sits by the window, scenting the breeze with every gust. You sit beside a historian older, sharp-eyed, draped in linen. He has a stack of journals before him, copies of ancient writings from as far back as Herodotus, the Greek historian who wandered into Persian lands and never quite recovered from the architectural humility attack. "Can you believe?" the old man says with a faint smile. Herodotus described Persian homes as cooler than the sea breeze in the Hellespont. He probably didn't mean it literally. But then again, after a few days in a Persian courtyard with wind drifting from a qanat-fed pool, maybe he did. Many ancient Greek and Roman travelers were stunned by what they encountered in Persia. Not just the grandeur of palaces, but the fact that ordinary people were living in climate-responsive homes without slaves fanning them or hauling snow from distant mountains. They were baffled, admiring, and just a little bit jealous. You flip through a translated excerpt from Xenophon's Anabasis. While marching through Persian territory, his soldiers encountered village homes that seemed to breathe out the heat and breathe in the shade. That's not bad for a man trained in phalanx formations. There are also references in medieval Arab texts. One traveler, al-Muqaddasi, wrote of how cities like Rai and Isfahan used underground aqueducts to deliver water and coolness to every room, as though the house itself were alive. It's oddly touching, the way they wrote about buildings like they had personalities. And maybe they did. Even Marco Polo, yes. That Marco mentioned the underground systems of Persia in passing, calling them channels of wondrous design that make the air sweet and the day tolerable. Which is, frankly, a poetic way of saying, wow, it wasn't hot for once. Historians still argue how much these foreign visitors understood of what they were seeing. Were they marveling at the results without grasping the mechanics, or did some actually return home and try to replicate the systems? There's evidence that windcatcher-inspired towers popped up later in Egypt and even southern Spain, after long periods of cultural contact. In Andalusian palaces like the Alhambra, you see the echoes, shallow water channels running through marble halls, shaded courtyards that center the home, open-air domes that let heat escape like steam from a pot. These aren't direct copies of Persian designs, but the fingerprints are there, whispered influences, carried by caravan and conquest. You close the final book and sit quietly for a moment. The wind rustles the pages one last time, as if to say, I was here. I told you so. You step back outside, and for the first time, you listen for the cooling systems instead of just feeling them. The subtle trickle of water beneath a street. The shift in sound when you step from sun into archway. The faint huff of air as it escapes a wind-catcher tower high above. These aren't just architectural features. They're experiences, and the people who lived with them wrote about them like characters in their own stories. Even Persian poetry, you recall, is full of cooling metaphors. The wind is not just air, it is the voice of love, the sigh of longing, the gentle reminder that relief exists. Hafez, Sadi, Rumi, all of them turned the breeze into metaphor, into meaning. And now, lying back beneath the very sky they wrote under, you begin to understand why. Because in a place so often gripped by heat and dryness, cool air isn't just physics. It's grace. It's a soft refusal to suffer. And every person who wrote about it, whether in poetry or travelogues, was paying tribute to something profound, the simple, quiet miracle of not being hot. So you close your eyes again. One last phrase from some forgotten traveler echoing in your ears. In Persia, the houses hum with wind. Tonight, they still do. The stars shimmer above you now, crisp and cold against the desert sky. But instead of staying still, you rise again because there's one more leg to this journey. You've seen how the Persians cooled their own cities. Now it's time to see how they inspired others. You begin in North Africa, where the arid wind skims across sand-colored rooftops. In the heart of the Tunisian Medina, you spotted something familiar. A rectangular tower, narrow slits on each side, catching the wind like an old friend. It's not called a badger here, but the function is unmistakable. A windcatcher, by another name, still whispers the same cool breeze. And it doesn't stop there. In Morocco, in cities like Fez and Marrakesh, homes have inner courtyards fed by underground channels. Their thick walls and shaded alleys would feel right at home in Yazd. You start to see patterns, strategies, not styles stretching across the Islamic world, especially after Persian engineers, architects, and scholars traveled alongside empire and trade. The most elegant expression of this diffusion may be in Andalusia. You stand now in the Court of the Lions at the Alhambra in Granada. The stone is pale and smooth, and water dances along carved channels between the columns. It's easy to assume this is simply art, but it isn't. Every pool, every trickle, every fountain is precisely placed to catch breezes, reflect light, and soften the heat. The air here is not just beautiful, it's curated. You lean over a narrow stream running through the floor of a summer reception hall. The breeze outside filters through a mashrabia screen, latticed wood that lets light and air in but keeps the sun at bay. The result is a space that feels gentle, like the world's volume has been turned down to a low, relaxing hum. Historians still debate the exact line of architectural transmission. Did the Umayyads bring Persian ideas westward during the Islamic expansion, or did knowledge move more subtly, riding along with merchants, scholars, and builders who shared tools and techniques across languages and empires? What's clear is this: by the 10th century, Persian cooling logic had been absorbed and reinterpreted across 3 continents, not copied. Necessarily, each region added its own twist, but unmistakably related. And not just in hot, dry regions, either. You travel now much later in time to a British colonial administrator standing confused and sweaty in southern Iraq, peering at a windcatcher and scribbling furiously in a notebook. These things work, he realizes, and by the early 20th century, windcatchers had been tested in Egypt, Pakistan, and even retrofitted into government buildings in India. You smile at the idea that long before the West discovered sustainable design, the East had already been living it for millennia. You find yourself in Dubai next, not ancient, not dusty, but towering and glassy. Yet, even here, on the edge of modernity, the past whispers. In a new eco-neighborhood, you see it a cluster of buildings with wind towers modernized. Yes, but unmistakable in form. They don't just look traditional, they work like their ancestors did, catching breezes, funneling them downward, reducing the need for mechanical cooling. You enter one of the buildings. The air inside is calm, balanced. No noise, no hum, just quiet flow. The architects didn't just add wind catchers for flair. They studied the pressure differences, the materials, the angles. They looked to ancient Persia, not as nostalgia, but as blueprint. Even in California, Arizona, and Australia, architects are starting to include passive design features based on ancient Persian techniques. Earth berms, courtyard-focused layouts, high vents, and thermal mass walls. The language has changed, but the intent is the same: use what the land gives you. Work with it, not against it. One architect in Spain even said, "If we had listened to the Persians sooner, we might have avoided a century of expensive mistakes." You pause now, sitting on a bench beside a reflecting pool in a new green tech university campus. The water is shallow and shaded. The breeze cuts cleanly through the corridor. You glance up. Windcatcher. Not ancient, but still breathing. It's funny. You came here looking for something old. What you found was something timeless. Because true wisdom doesn't disappear. It travels. It adapts. It waits for people to need it again. And now, as the world swelters under the weight of rising temperatures, those old ideas, those clever, quiet answers to heat are starting to hum again. So you close your eyes. You imagine the wind as a ribbon drawn from Yazd to Cairo, from Granada to Dubai. It loops through towers, dances across domes, slips between reeds, and arrives finally here, where it brushes against your cheek in perfect, cooling silence. You're moving through time now as much as space, and tonight you arrive in a paradox, a city of glass and steel, built on sand, learning once again to listen to the wind. You've seen how ancient Persian designs spread across empires and centuries, but now you're in the present, where the desert is rising in a new way. Welcome to Masdar City, in the United Arab Emirates, a place envisioned as a zero-carbon urban experiment, where the past and future sit awkwardly side by side. You glance up, and there it is again. A tower, not quite a badgir, more like a futuristic sculpture. But functionally, it's the same. A modern windcatcher. This one is sleek and tall, made of steel and concrete. Sensors open and close internal flaps depending on the temperature. It doesn't rely solely on intuition or apprenticeships. It has AI, algorithms, but deep inside its design, the bones are ancient, Persian bones. You walk the shaded streets of this experimental city. The buildings are tall and narrow, casting shade just like in Yazd. The walkways are designed to channel breezes. There are even underground cooling tubes, not qanats exactly, but inspired by them. It's strange, isn't it? In trying to build the future, architects have gone looking for the past. Even skyscrapers in places like Doha and Riyadh are borrowing these ideas. One tower has a double-skin facade that traps cooler air, mimicking the thick thermal mass of a mud brick wall. Another has a rooftop fountain that mirrors the passive evaporative cooling pools of Persian courtyards. But here's the twist. The buildings that succeed today really succeed. Not just look impressive, imitate the function, not the form. They don't just copy mud domes or slap wind towers onto their roofs for aesthetic charm. They go deeper. They ask, why did that old thing work, and how do we make it work here, now? Again. You wander into an eco-hotel in the middle of the desert. It boasts solar panels, smart lighting, and app-controlled everything. But your favorite feature? The natural air shaft running through the center of the lobby, lined with water features, shaded with palm fronds. It doesn't buzz or whir. It whispers, just like in a Persian home. Historians still argue how much of this revival is deliberate versus coincidental. Some say modern architects rediscovered these solutions through necessity, not nostalgia. Others argue it's a quiet form of architectural respect, finally acknowledging that the ancients solved problems we're still struggling with, only with fewer resources and far less noise. You lie back on a sunbed under a pergola. The slats are angled just so, blocking the worst of the sun but letting air flow through. It's designed like this because someone, somewhere, read about how the Persians angled their city walls to catch prevailing winds. Maybe even someone listening to a sleepy little video about desert cooling systems. The irony is, After a century of trying to conquer nature with machinery air conditioners, refrigeration, skyscrapers with sealed windows, we're coming back around to the idea that working with nature is smarter, more sustainable, quieter, gentler. You think back to that first night, tucked under mudbrick and starlight, lying on a rooftop in Yazd. That cooling breeze, you're still chasing it. And now you know it wasn't just a trick of the wind, it was a philosophy. Design with intent, respect the land, slow down, cool off. You begin to imagine what other ancient answers we've forgotten. What else might still be waiting under dust and stone, ready to be rediscovered when the time is right? Because let's be honest, modern air conditioning is a miracle, but it's also noisy, expensive, and energy-hungry. Windcatchers. They just stand there, proud and silent. A 1,000-year-old solution still humming in the dark. You walk through the city once more. The air is warm but moving. A soft fanfare of function. The buildings don't shimmer, they breathe. And finally, you sit on a bench of cooled stone, beside a narrow channel of recycled water, under a canopy that shifts with the sun. You look up, and high above, the windcatcher draws in a gust, pulling it downward. Not to cool a king, not to impress a traveler. Just to make a city livable again. The breeze reaches your face. You close your eyes. You return, now, to where it all began. Not just the beginning of this journey, but the beginning of the idea a hot, dry place, filled with people who refuse to be ruled by heat. The desert still stretches out in every direction, golden and vast, but this time, it feels quieter, like it's listening to its own history. You walk the outer streets of Yazd one last time, where the skyline is a jagged rhythm of domes and windcatchers, rising and falling like waves of ancient thought. The houses are still there, the qanats still hum below, and the breeze, faithful, invisible, gentle, still finds its way through clay and corridor. You step into a familiar courtyard, that same lemon tree, that same bubbling pool. You sit on the same cool stone bench. It's the same, and yet everything feels different now, because now you understand. Every inch of this place is an answer to a question: how do we live well in heat? Not just survive, not endure. Live well. With dignity, with balance, with design that listens as much as it commands. You glance up. The windcatcher tower stands over you, patient and proud. It doesn't buzz, blink, or beep. It has no settings, and yet, right now, it's working. You can feel the breeze moving over your arms, across your neck, around your ankles. It doesn't demand your attention. It earns it. It's easy to think of history as loud wars, kings, revolutions. But most of history was quiet. Most of history was like this: people trying to be a little more comfortable, a little more rested, a little more at ease. And when it comes to that kind of history, the Persians weren't just participants, they were masters. Historians still debate if we give them enough credit. Their cooling systems weren't flashy. They weren't monumental like pyramids or dramatic like colosseums. They were personal. They touched skin. They shaped daily life. And they lasted. Even now, in the age of climate control and smart homes, Persian cooling is making a comeback, not out of nostalgia, but necessity. You lie back now, the sun setting behind the edge of the courtyard. The stars begin to prick through the darkening sky. The air is cool, not cold, just right. You can hear the faintest murmur of water from below. You don't need a screen, a remote, or a thermostat. You just breathe. It's working. It's still working. You think of all you've seen: windcatchers and qanats, domes and courtyards, palaces and humble homes, ancient ice and poetry on the breeze. And then you think of your own space, back home, sealed tight against the world. Maybe, just maybe, there's something to learn from this. Maybe staying cool isn't about fighting heat. Maybe it's about learning how to listen to it. And maybe the best air conditioning isn't what we plug in, but what we build around. You sigh, the windcatcher sighs back. And with that, we begin to slow things down. Let your breath settle now. Let your body feel the weight of stillness. The kind of weight that isn't heavy but grounding. Imagine the night deepening around you, the wind softening into something even gentler. You are lying beneath stars that haven't moved in thousands of years, surrounded by walls that know the rhythm of sun and shadow. The ground beneath you is cool. The air moves slowly across your skin, like it knows where the warm places are and wants to soothe them. The world hums very faintly, as though the qanats beneath your feet are telling lullabies in languages too old to name. You've traveled across centuries, drifted through dust and stone, walked through buildings that breathed. You've seen that the most brilliant ideas don't always shout. Sometimes they whisper, and keep whispering, for generations. Let that thought calm you. Let your breath match the hush of a courtyard at night. Let your mind settle like dust in a windless room. The ancient Persians knew that comfort wasn't a luxury. It was a necessity, a right, something to be built with care and passed down with love. And now, as you lie in this story, that comfort is yours, too. The breeze is slower now. Your thoughts are slower now. And your eyes? They're closing.